Hello, everybody. Hi. Thanks for coming tonight on such a warm evening. And it's a small, intimate, but very special audience. So thanks for being with us. It is being filmed as well tonight, so we're really pleased that the debate will go out to a wide audience. I'm Dani. I work at the Almeida. I'm Director of Participation here, and I'll be chairing the event. I'm just going to ask the panel to just introduce themselves briefly, and then I'll kick us off with a few questions. So, Anita.
Hi, I'm Anita Biressi. I'm a Professor of Media and Society, that's the name that I coined for myself when I got promoted at the University of Roehampton. And I've got quite a long history of being interested in things like reality television, tabloid culture, true crime narratives, and stories of the self, really. Life stories, narratives, that kind of thing.
Thank you. Bella?
Hi, I'm Bella Younger. I'm a comedian, and I run the parody Instagram account Deliciously Stella.
Great, thank you. Nick?
Hello, I am Nick Arnold. I work as a journalist for BBC Three, which is quite a recent career change. The reason I'm here is I actually used to work as a producer on all the trashy reality television shows that a lot of people love so much.
We'll be asking him more about those later. We've been trying to get the gossip out of him, but he's being very discreet. So can I just, before we start, can I just get a sense of whether people in the audience have seen the treatment or not, so that I don't spoil it? So could you put up your hand if you have seen it? So it's sort of half and half. Okay, that's fine. You're seeing it, yes. That's fine. That's totally fine. Okay, good, lovely. Great. Okay. Well, I won't give away any important plot points because generally the discussion is going to be more general anyway. It's not specifically about the plot of the play. But as I'm sure you know, the world of the play is around kind of who owns somebody's story and how much value does it have, how much worth does it have, and it centres around a girl called Anne, who has a traumatic story to share, and what producers do when they get their hands on that story. And we were interested in this debate, sort of widening this debate, because although the play is 25 years old, it feels incredibly current, because obviously issues around kind of constructed realities and what's real and what's not feel so incredibly relevant at the moment. And kind of how we manipulate and use people in these scenarios is incredibly relevant. But I guess it's also worth saying that what's been really interesting for the company putting the treatment together has been that they've had to, obviously, as actors and creative teams, they've had to look at not demonising anybody in that process. And so what's been quite interesting, for example, the actress Indira who plays Jennifer, who is one of the manipulators, if you like, her process, there was a point in rehearsals where she said, I can't find any humanity in this character. And she had to go through that process of thinking about, for her, what drives her. And actually, for her, it's about pleasing audiences. And it's obviously about making money, but it's about finding the best story. And so I think everybody in the rehearsal process read lots of magazines with real-life stories in and went through the process of deciding if they had to make a TV programme about one of those, which would it be, and realised very quickly how tough and harsh they were becoming about people's real lives and about whether they were interesting or not, and realised how easily that process happens. So I won't say anything more about the play, but it kind of led us to thinking that it would be really interesting to discuss reality, constructed realities in all their forms. So I guess what I wanted to start by talking about is what leads people like Anne, or like people who sign themselves up for reality TV shows. What do we think as a panel, what do people think drives a person to sign themselves up for a show like that, and what do you think they get out of it? Can I ask you first, Nick?
Yeah, of course. I guess you have to, it's such a big topic that, if someone's signing up to a structured reality show now is very different to someone signing up to a structured reality show 10 years ago. Yes. I'm sure, Anita, you can talk a lot more about that. But one of the shows I've worked on is Big Brother, and back when Big Brother started, people talk a lot about how it was a social experiment, but now I don't think anyone could really call it a social experiment. In my experience, I think it comes from the fact that there's a lot of glorification in money and success and fame, and essentially I think nowadays, if you look at the structure of reality shows, the kind of Made in Chelseas and the Geordie Shores, I think principally, if you were to ask me why are people signing up for that, it's because they want their name up in lights and they want the money, and that would be my answer.
It's all about fame.
Yeah, I do think so.
Yeah.
I think in terms of my journalism now, I think that putting yourself out there can be so much more to other people. But for me, that's not what most reality television is about.
And have you ever experienced a person regretting being, kind of getting through that process and realising suddenly that there's a lot more to this fame lark, and actually putting their real lives out there has created some issues for them, or,
Yeah, very much so. I think that's why when you look through the series that have now been on TV for a while, that's why you have characters who are in it for a few series and then they kind of, they're not anymore. And I think possibly the reality of that sets in. And what's really interesting, people always find this really interesting when I talk about it, is when you're casting different shows, there's actually a group of people that you start to recognize that apply for the same shows. And there's like a whole little circuit of these faces that you just recognize. And actually, my housemate is really into Made in Chelsea at the moment, which I used to work on that one as well. And after I worked on it, I just couldn't watch. But I've got back into it this series. And there's a girl on this series called Tina who was actually on Love Island last year, which I worked on there. So that's kind of just an example of how these people, they do just go from show to show to show, and it's not... I can't see any other reason other than just trying to maximise their screen time, really.
And how much are they being themselves, do you feel? That's a big question.
That is a big question. Well, I would... I think people can become caricatures of themselves on these shows. I think they become very aware of the role that they play on that show. And it was the job of people like myself to try and make that as interesting to watch as possible. But I do, to kind of, wave a flag in the corner of the TV shows, I don't think they're as fake as people think that they are. I don't think these people are actors at all. I think that they are themselves. They got cast to be on those shows because they are interesting people. It's just that the situations that they are put in, that's where the structure comes from, I think.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Bella, what about you? I mean, obviously, it's a very different world that you're in.
Yeah.
But, I mean, in terms of your journey to creating, I don't know how much of you follow Deliciously Stella, but maybe you can talk a little bit about what led to that and how, obviously, that's a constructed reality, but how much is all social media that, in your opinion, and,
Yeah, back to what Nick was saying, I actually get asked to go on those shows quite a lot, which I think probably says quite a lot about me.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, I think people probably see me and are like, oh, she's a caricature already. Like,
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I've been put in those situations and sort of produced, and they're like, you sound a bit posh. Let's put you on Hampstead Heath with a toy gun. And I'm like, no.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely not.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I run a parody Instagram account which sort of pokes fun at the idea of clean eating and gym selfies and all that sort of nonsense. And I started it when I was working in food television, and I was researching these girls for work, and I was like, why is everyone on the beach all the time? Like, how many avocados can you eat? And so I started sort of taking silly photos that hopefully in a gentle way mock what everyone else is doing. And it got very popular, and I've been very lucky, and I get to be funny for a living now, which is amazing.
And would you say that people accept that what you're doing is a character, or do they just think that that's you in the same way as other Instagrammers are posting pictures of their real lives?
I think people definitely sort of blur the line. Like, quite often when I go and meet people for work, they'll be like, why are you not drinking a Lucozade? And I'm like, well, it's 8 a.m. on a Monday, so I'm all right. And I think people sort of do think that I abhor eating vegetables and sort of live on for my deep fat fryer. But I don't at all. I mean, sometimes I feel like I have to balaclava to buy courgettes, but...
Because it will be off-brand for your character.
Yeah, because it'd be off-brand for my character. Exactly.
Yeah. And what do you think, what do you make of kind of the, I guess, how much, the fiction of social media, I guess, and how much of that whole Instagram world is a big fiction in the first place? I mean, that's kind of partly what you're parodying, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's quite dangerous that these people are presenting these fake lives as real. And I think that the difference to when when I was young and I used to pull pictures out of magazines and I'd be like, oh, that woman is so beautiful. But you go, yeah, but I know she's photoshopped. I know she's being paid to be on the beach. I also know she's a Victoria's Secret model. There's only 10 of them for a reason. And these people on Instagram are being presented as our peers, as like the girl down the road. But, with all these apps like Facetune and all these photoshopping things, they're making themselves look a way that isn't real. And I think that that's potentially very damaging.
There's a lot of that whole culture for teenage girls as well, isn't there, of those people who do the kind of, no makeup selfie stuff, but they've clearly got loads of makeup on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who do they think they're fooling?
Yeah. Okay. And Anita, obviously you've tracked how far reality TV's come. I don't know if you want to talk about kind of how you feel about where we're at now and kind of what the cultural evolution of that format has been and where it's got to. And
well, just to connect that slightly back to the first question about why people
want to do it,
do it and did it around 2000s when it started. They're individuals, obviously, and they might want to do it for various personal reasons. But there is also a big cultural turn towards self-exhibitionism, isn't there? Mm-hmm. And in the late 70s, there was this conservative thinker called Christopher Lasch, and he wrote this book called The Culture of Narcissism. And he said that we're reaching a point where everybody knows from which side they photograph best. And he felt this was a negative thing. I'm not saying it is. He was from a particular political perspective. But he argued this was actually a cultural shift. It wasn't just individuals responding to new formats as they arise, but it was a new way of interacting with the world. And a few years ago, I would ask students, maybe at the beginning, 2006, 2007, do you know anyone who's going on TV or has applied to go on TV or has auditioned or put any of these videos up to try and get on? And they wouldn't. Now I might ask, a third of the class at least, if I've got a class of 35, will either know someone or they will have auditioned themselves to be on TV. And so there is a trend in which people, I think, are more comfortable in presenting a performance of the self. And then, of course, you have the rise of digital culture, and so you've got all the blogging and social media and stuff like that. In fact, one student, when I said to him, which side do you photograph from best? He said, I photograph best from both sides, and that's why I'm going to be a star.
That's brilliant.
And he did get on a reality show. I can't remember which one now.
Wow.
So, so there's that kind of larger cultural trend, which we're all engaged in the way in which we perform the self in all these different formats. But then you were also asking about the shifts in reality TV across the decades. That the shifts occur every few years because the format hybridizes. So it merges with another format and repackages itself. So that's why you can see reality shows hybridizing with medical documentaries or food documentaries or so on. But in essence, as Nick said, they started as social experiment formats, really. And I suppose they still have that kind of slightly edgy quality, don't they? So you see how people will emerge at the end of it.
And do you feel, I mean, you mentioned earlier a sort of therapy element, that there are some reality TV programs particularly that are sort of on the edge of being therapeutic for people. Do you think that it's ever, any of these programs or ways of connecting, showing yourself like that, can it be therapeutic for the person who's participating?
It's amazing when you watch them how many of the participants claim, as they're going through the process, that that it's the experience that matters. I perfectly accept a lot of them want to be famous. A student of mine that I asked earlier this term, I asked every student what they wanted to do, and one of them said, I want to be well known. And I said, what do you want to be well known for? And she said, I haven't decided yet, but but being well known is the thing that I want to achieve at a certain point in my life. But when, maybe it's the way it's edited, maybe you'll know this better than I, but quite a few of these reality programs, the participants, as they go through, some want to win, and they're not here to make friends. That's the famous phrase. They use. I'm not here to make friends. But quite a few will talk about the experience as a kind of learning experience. They learn about themselves. And I think that maybe that's part of the therapy discourse, isn't it?
And do you think that they believe that you don't think that's kind of a constructed thing in itself, you know, that sort of language of therapy seems to have come into our lives much more, hasn't it? And that sort of self-expression, as you say, that kind of feeling the need to say, I've changed and I'm a different person as part of this process. I don't know. Maybe that's just me being cynical.
I think it is a process of change, isn't it? Haven't you
Well,
been through something
Yeah,
like
what do you
that?
think? Are people different after they...
in terms of making TV shows, you've probably heard of this, Anita, but one of the biggest things, you'll all recognise it when you watch a show, is it looks at the journey that someone goes on. So it's a classic X Factor sob story, you know, say you just had some big trauma in your life, and then over the weeks you get to watch that person become this, like, you know, stronger and better and happier person. And it's kind of this word that everybody sort of, you abide by it when you're making TV, but no one actually dares say the word journey because it's just so sickening. Like, oh God, if I hear that word journey one more time. But it is true, and people do, I don't know, I can't remember where I read it, but there was an article recently about how, like you said, these hybrid formats, they are finite, the people aren't interested in them forever. And I read an article recently that was talking about the end of the journey in TV and actually how maybe we're getting bored of it now because we've got so used to it. It's transparent. We can spot that kind of sob story that they're trying to make us feel. We can see through it now.
And what do you all think about the kind of ethics around taking people's stories and potentially manipulating them a bit, or seeing that there's somebody a bit vulnerable who might go on an interesting journey and knowing that will make good TV? I mean, maybe from your, like, how much that all that stuff, the ethics stuff, sort of thought about from the kind of TV companies and producers? And
it's definitely thought about. We were just discussing this earlier, and you know, on most shows there will be a psych test for people, and you know, they are supposedly deemed to be mentally healthy and well, and it's not going to be damaging for them. But at the same time, it's entertainment, and I think it's sometimes a tricky line to cross. The journalism I now work in is mental health, so I've done a complete U-turn. So I would argue that we should be paying more attention to the mental health of the contributors. But on the flip side, with shows like the constructed reality ones, like Made in Chelsea, The Only Way is Essex, it's been around long enough now that they know what they're signing up for. So the ethics, again, is kind of a grey area because they're putting themselves in that situation, I think.
Yeah.
It's tricky. You have to tread carefully.
yeah. And what do you two think about the kind of ethics involved in, you know, constructed realities? And
I mean, it seems deeply unethical to me that people as young as, say, for example, the Kardashians were put on television as children, and now we look at someone like Kylie Jenner, who's, 18 and seems to have had more surgery than anyone on earth. And it's clearly affected the way that she's grown up, and she's now set on this path, and I feel like she feels like she can't get away from it. I mean, obviously I don't know her personally, I can't speak for her, but I find that quite alarming.
And I guess that's a big difference between people who've signed up for it and chosen to take part in something like that, and as you say, children who are catapulted into it because they're famous parents or something. Yeah. What about you, Anita?
I do feel uncomfortable about it. I mean, now we are at a point where you would think that people would be less naive, wouldn't you, about the consequences of the contract that they're entering into. But I've been watching a lot of programmes recently around reality TV and mental health, around things like hoarding and OCD and agoraphobia and so on. I've also watched a lot, because I also write about social class, of what's sometimes called poverty porn, reality programming, and people have given consent around that. And I understand that you enter a formal contract with producers. You also have a contract of trust, a kind of less formal contract. And that's okay at the time. What I always wonder about is what happens afterwards, not just a year after or 2 years after. What happens 10 years after or 20 years after, particularly when you have children on the show as well. So I've been watching Doctor in the House recently, in which a doctor comes into a house to try to help cure somebody who's got a long-term health problem. And in that show, you have small children. And I just wonder what will happen in 10 years' time if they get hold of that footage and see this footage of their mother in distress, from earlier. So, I mean, I understand none of us like to think about the future, but it's that lack of futurity, I think, that makes me feel a bit itchy about it all.
Sort of how long does the duty of care extend?
Yes, it can't possibly go on for long, can it, after the programme's over?
No. I mean, how long do you think that duty of care is from a TV producer's kind of perspective? Is it just that, like, the process of filming and then once it's over, it's done?
It's sort of tricky because what they think they've filmed can be completely different to what they actually end up seeing, because an edit is incredibly powerful. One of my favourite bits of working on Made in Chelsea was actually every Monday night when it was on, all the cast and all the crew would all meet up in a venue, and we'd hire it, and there'd be a screen, and we'd all watch it together. And we would know it because we've seen 1,000 copies of it, but the cast are seeing it for the first time, and it was like your heart would melt for them, like watching them like squirm, like sat a seat in front of you, and you're like, oh my god, you haven't even seen the worst of it yet. But like in terms of that duty of care, it should be better. I think it could be better. It could be better. Fundamentally, that's why I ended up leaving.
Yeah.
Do you wonder sort of what will happen to these people once they've been on reality TV? Because some of them will go on to other things, like they'll become presenters or they'll go on to other reality TV shows, but some of them will sort of leave. And then once you've been almost tarred with that brush, can you just go and get a normal job? Will it ever be the same once you've sort of tasted that level of fame? Will you ever be satisfied doing anything else? I know a few people who are on that show that Nick worked on, Made in Chelsea, and I just wonder what the future is for them when the show inevitably stops.
Yeah. I know, you're right. It feels like it would be quite difficult to go and do a normal job, as it were. Yeah.
But also TV used to be ephemeral. If you were filmed in documentaries like The Family in the 70s, it would be pretty difficult to go and get a copy. You might have, perhaps later on you could start recording, but it wasn't that easy. You'd have to go and do a bit of digging around. But now a lot of material's available quite quickly and easily, isn't it? As well.
Yes, absolutely. And once you're on the internet, you're there forever, really, aren't you? I might just move us on to just talking a little bit about how an audience perceives. There's lots of different formats we're talking about, but how they perceive constructed realities. How much do you think the audience care about whether it's totally real or not? How invested are they on it being, if they find out that character isn't like that, or if your audience really hope that you are exactly as Deliciously Stella is, and then they find out you're not, do they feel sort of duped? Maybe you could start.
I don't think that anyone, or hopefully I don't think anyone feels duped, because I hope it's quite obvious though. I don't put Haribo on avocado on toast and think that's a normal thing to do. So I think it's fine for me. I imagine it's very different for someone who's essentially playing themselves on a television show, or even on social media, someone who's just sort of ramped up every aspect of their lives that they think is aspirational and puts that out there and nothing else. Like,
Anita, do you think we've come a long way since those first people who kind of, you know, like the Lonely Girl? I don't know if you want to tell people about that first in 2006 when she people felt a bit deceived, I think, didn't they?
I mean, the popularity of people in reality TV shows, the cast, a lot of it is rooted in how authentic audiences think they are.
Yeah.
Whether they're real people and whether those are real emotions. And at the beginning of Web 2.0, we had somebody called Jenny Cam around 2002, 2003, I think, who filmed her life in a dorm. It was mainly stills, but gradually it was 24 hours a day. And she was a real person, and it started to trigger quite a lot of coverage in the States. And then a few years later, we had Lonely Girl 15. And this was quite nicely edited footage that went out very regularly, that gradually told the story of this young woman. She claimed to be 16. Turned out she was older. She claimed to be 16, and she drip-fed the audience this story about her boyfriend and her family life. And there was a kind of context to it where she explained that she was basically stuck in her room quite a lot because it emerged that her family were part of a cult. And the audience for Lonely Girl 15 grew and grew. And there was a real kind of affinity starting to build between the audience and her. And gradually it was rattled. It turned out that this was a completely dramatised script, that she was an actor, and that it was people from the TV industry, I think. And it was basically one of the first online dramas.
And there were web designers and business advisors and a whole, you know, army of people around it. But which is, of course, what made it so successful.
The sense of betrayal was quite dramatic. And since then, I think this still is a feature of this kind of entertainment, that people are looking for the authentic person. In the early days of Big Brother, you know, it was the down-to-earth bloke who was going to win because people felt that his was the less mediated persona. I think people still want to trust, actually. I think there is a contract of trust there, and people can get quite upset if they think they've been had.
Yeah.
It's always the first question I get when people find, how real is it?
Yeah.
Because people want to know.
And do you think they're hoping for the answer, it's all real, we're not?
Definitely, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, they don't want to hear that you've staged it all with actors and, Yeah. And what is that desire? Where does that come from? I know we talked at the beginning a little bit about, we've talked about like why people want to be on those shows, but what is it, why do we want to see that normal person, like you're saying, that normal bloke wins Big Brother? Why do we want that? Is that aspirational? Or is it just an affirmation of that person is a bit like me and they're on the telly, so therefore I must be all right? What's going on?
I think it's that relatability. Yeah. I think there's a general rule when you're making these shows that you want anybody watching to think there is someone there that I relate to in some way. And I think that's what people connect with.
I think it appeals to our inner nosiness as well.
Yeah.
You know, you always want to know what's going on next door, even if you're just peeking over the garden fence, but it's that sort of amplified.
True. You feel like you could be a fly on the wall in somebody's life for a bit.
Yeah, it's gossip writ large, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's so strange now. We even watch Gogglebox.
Yeah.
So watching people watching...
Oh, yes, that's
I
true.
love Gogglebox.
As well.
Yeah, why does that work? It's funny, isn't it? It does work. People love it.
I find it very funny.
Yeah.
I think they're very, very funny people. It's very well cast.
Yeah. Yeah.
A lot of the stories are aspirational, aren't they? Because if you look at something like X Factor or Pop Idol, you want the person, you know, who's had the tough life.
The underdog.
Yeah, to be the one that comes out a star at the end. It's this kind of mythology that, you know, that your talent will take you to the top, whatever your social background, really.
Yeah.
As well.
Well, we've got to stop for tonight because everybody's got to get ready, get the set ready for the treatment tonight. So But thank you so much for coming. Can we say a big thank you to our very erudite panel? Thanks very much for coming.